Winston Churchill was born on the 30th of November 1874 at 1:30 a.m. in Woodstock, England. His sun sign is in Sagittarius. This represents his focal consciousness or soul. Sagittarius is an optimistic sign ruled by Jupiter. The motto for Sagittarius is I seek. These people can be outgoing, jovial, open-minded and optimistic. They have a desire to seek and explore either physically or mentally. Due to their Jupiterian optimism, they can sometimes be irresponsible and careless, seeing life as a great adventure. His moon sign, subconscious, is on the cusp of Leo, I will, and Virgo, I examine. The moon is about inner emotions and instinctive needs. Leo is the pride of a lion, so Churchill will carry an instinctive need for pride in himself, and being in the 11th house will manifest this pride around groups, friends and goals he sets himself. His ascendant AC, personal identity and first impressions, rests on the cusp of Libra, I balance, and Virgo, I examine. Libra is the sign of diplomacy, the ability to see both sides of a situation in a fair and balanced way. With Virgo's influence of examination together with Libra, this makes for a comprehensive view and ability when reaching a fair complementary conclusion to most situations. The Sun, the will, and Venus, love and liking, are situated in his third house of communication. This combination of planets promotes a likable response to his communicative technique. His focal consciousness, the Sun, dominates this house, energizing his will and courage in this area of communication. The Sun in this house also promotes a need to be noticed, to be center of attention, giving the will the opportunity to express itself. Pluto, transformation in Taurus, the throat and the voice, can create powerful attachments to the subconscious, resulting in unusual speech patterns which don't respect the boundaries of left brain communication, especially in the male, with the language center of the brain being smaller in males and located only in the left hemisphere, gives rise to male language disorders such as dyslexia, stuttering and speech defects. Not only does it transform, it can also cause malformations. This was the case with young Winston. He struggled with the S word. His impediment was a mix between a stammer and a lisp. Neptune is the god of the sea. It represents higher levels of conscious awareness, away from the five senses towards the spiritual realm. It promotes the urge to escape from everyday states of consciousness into different levels of perceived reality. This can be done with the use of alcohol, drugs, meditation, or mystical experiences. Neptune is situated between Aries, the head, and Taurus, the throat, a position anatomically relevant to the mouth. It is well known that Churchill was a heavy drinker and never far from a drink. Some consider him to be an alcoholic because his daily routine began at breakfast with a very diluted whiskey and water. However, his drinking did not seem to affect his ability to function or work, and very few people ever saw him intoxicated beyond comprehension. His famous quote basically says it all. In Churchill's birth chart, Uranus and Saturn oppose one another. We have already established that Judaism is associated with Saturn and Uranus with German National Socialism. Churchill's Mars, god of war, is in harmony with Saturn. They are both in air signs thinking alike. When analysing Churchill's chart as a lifetime cycle, a few interesting observations can be made which tally in with his life. For example, the moon dominates his childhood. The moon represents the feminine, sensitivity, and the mother in one's life. During Churchill's childhood, he saw little of his father and was essentially brought up by his nanny, Mrs. Everest, and his mother. In 1882, at the age of 7, he was sent off to St. George's boarding school near Ascot. He stayed there for 2 years, a time when Uranus dominates his chart. Uranus promotes independence and rebellion in one's character. Being in the sign of Leo, this gives great energy to his will towards independence. A grand trine is a harmonious planetary configuration which is generally considered to be a gift from the gods, relating to natural ability. The trine creates a uniform equilateral triangle which influences one of the 4 elements. In Churchill's case, it is fire. Therefore, fire energy should come easy to Winston. But with a trine, there is usually a catch. The planets within the trine are considered to be within an enclosed perpetual conversation, and in order to tap into this trine's metaphysical energy, an outlet is needed. Otherwise, the trine's energetic potential can go unused, resulting in the individual being viewed as lazy in these areas. This outlet will be found where another planet dissects one of the sides of the equilateral triangle. In Churchill's case, it is Jupiter and Mars in his first house of Libra. In practical terms, the result of this can see Churchill appear uninterested and lacking in drive unless he is involved in Libran diplomacy, balancing his surroundings. When this occurs, Jupiter channels all this extra fire energy towards his pursuit of balance and justice, with Mars, the god of war, by its side. Although he was gifted in these areas, throughout his childhood, he was considered lazy and lacking in drive. In 1900, Churchill won his first seat for Parliament as an MP for Oldham. Pluto influences this period, a planet of transformation and subconscious power. The word plutocracy, which means government by the wealthy, is a derivative of the planet Pluto. In 1911, Churchill is appointed First Lord of the Admiralty, a post he would keep until 1915. This coincides with Pisces, a water sign, ruled by Jupiter, the planet of expansion. Here he sets about expanding and improving the British fleet ready for World War I. In 1920, Churchill's attention was drawn to the Bolshevik threat from the newly formed Soviet Union. Saturn in Churchill's chart comes at the time when Bolshevism was raising its ugly head. The symbol for Bolshevism was the hammer and sickle, a cross over a crescent, a perverted version of the glyph for Saturn. It is also important to point out that the first Soviet government was 80 to 85% Jewish. There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and for the most part atheistic Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all others. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. Moreover, the principal inspiration and driving power comes from the Jewish leaders. This movement among the Jews is not new. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, and now, at last, this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire. This period for Churchill was in the sign of Aquarius, another sign ruled by the planet Saturn. In 1924, Churchill rejoins the Conservative Party as the Chancellor of the Exchequer. This period on his birth chart is influenced by Capricorn, a sign synonymous with business and finance, with its motto I use, usury, ruled by Saturn. Saturn is also concerned with austerity, frustration, restriction and depression. As Chancellor of the Exchequer, he oversaw the reintroduction of the gold standard, which ultimately led to deflation, unemployment, and the general strike of 1926. Consequently, the Conservatives lost the 1929 general election, and Churchill found himself without a job. This was to become the low point in his political career, the start of his wilderness years. It also happens to be the lowest point in his natal chart, and the start of Sagittarius, a sign synonymous with the 9th house of higher learning, philosophy and travel. After the 1929 general election and his departure from office, he went on a 3-month tour of Canada and North America. A great deal of his time was devoted to travelling and writing. Venus appears here in his chart, the planet of love and liking, reflecting his love for travelling and being around people who he feels comfortable with. The Sun also appears here in his chart. This is the planet of the self, the focal consciousness, vitality, and all those characteristics contained in the 5th house of creativity, pleasure, and romance. The second half of the 1930s took place in Scorpio, I desire, with Mercury, communication, showering its influence over this period for Churchill, creating an environment in which he had the desire to communicate, which is exactly what he did. Not only did he write 4 volumes of Marlborough, his life and times, along with great contemporaries, he also made numerous speeches and gave talks wherever and to whomever would listen. Although many people, along with politicians, considered him to be out of touch and politically obsolete, his time was still yet to come. On September the 1st, Germany marched into Poland. A few days later, on September the 3rd, both Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II officially begins. The same day, Churchill is called back to Westminster and made First Lord of the Admiralty, the same position he held during the outbreak of World War I, which takes place in Scorpio, another water sign. On the 10th of May, Germany invaded France, Holland, Belgium and the Netherlands in a coordinated attack known as Blitzkrieg, lightning war, Uranus being the god of the sky and lightning bolts from out of the blue. Consequently, Britain was gripped by panic. With its government divided and in disarray, there was only one man who was capable of steering Britain in the direction necessary for its very survival. Only one man who understood the gravity of the situation and what was needed at this monumental turning point in world history. That man was Winston Churchill. By that evening, Churchill was the Prime Minister of a wartime coalition cabinet. Political differences were brushed aside to make way for the bloodiest fight the British Empire had ever seen. Churchill later wrote, on the 13th of May, Churchill made his first speech to the House of Commons as British Prime Minister, in which he said, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat." There is only one planet which could reflect this situation in his birth chart, a planet which would represent expansion, optimism, faith and good fortune. That planet is Jupiter, the crescent over the cross, the planet chosen by Christianity with its personified ambassador, Jesus Christ. Jupiter rests on a backdrop of Libra, the sign associated with diplomacy and balance. It is Churchill's outlet for his God-given gift of his fiery trine. Next to Jupiter is Mars, the god of war and proactive physical energy. Conjunct with Jupiter throughout the war years, this could only lead to one thing: an abundance of war.